Perhaps are we live? I think we are live.
Yes, it said
Good.
go.
Good morning, everyone. We are reporting from South Florida, despite my jacket. That's a whole nother story. You are watching Tea Time from Unity on the Bay. I'm joined with Carmen Navedo this morning, who is going to be grilling me on Alan Watts. We're flipping the script this morning. And she's actually going to be hosting Tea Time. But before we get into that, I'm going to allow our audience to build a little bit. I'm going to share this on my Facebook. And while I do that, Carmen, is there anything you want to say?
I just want to say I'm grateful that you're willing to be playful enough to be switching the roles and allowing me um, to co-host, to host here with you, and to ask you the questions.
Yeah, I've actually been looking forward to this because one of my struggles in life is letting go and letting God. And so I have completely let go in this experience. Just so everybody knows, Carmen has not given me the quote she's going to talk about. So everything she asks to talk about is going to be completely new to me. Um, if I don't know something, I'll just say I don't know, right? And everything will be okay. We invite you, if you're just joining us this morning, good morning, Chris. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning,
Um,
Jonathan and Chris.
if you're just joining us, we're just waiting for a few more people to get on and give them a chance to get their tea or coffee. We have ours. And we ask that you share this on your page so that other people can join us. And we also ask that you participate this morning. The thing about tea time is the more you participate, the more fun we have. So if you have questions or comments about Alan Watts or anything that we're talking about, put it in the chat section. You see it on the side of the screen, and we'll answer your questions.
Good
Sound
morning,
good?
Sherry. Good morning, Lola B.
Good morning. Good morning. Jonathan says the tea is good today, Henny. Yes, it is. So we're going to jump in. I told Carmen I was going to talk a little bit about Alan Watts. And I totally have his Wikipedia pulled up because what? This is a casual experience, and there's already too much in this brain to remember. Um, I I have been reading and listening to Alan Watts for probably 5 years now. He's one, I think, of the best philosophers, modern day philosophers. But just to give you some background on him, and I'm going to read this. Alan Watts was an English philosopher, writer, and speaker known for interpreting and popularizing Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism for the Western audience. So he really brought it over to the West. He was born in England. He moved to the United States in 1938 and began Zen training in New York. He received a master's degree in theology and became an Episcopal priest in 1945. I didn't know that. He left the ministry in 1950 and moved to California, where he joined the facility of the American Academy of Asian Studies. So you may be familiar with him. He has a ton of stuff on YouTube. His teachings are profound, as you said the other day, Carmen. So I guess that's enough. We can just jump right in. I hand over tea time to you, Carmen.
So, for those of you that do not know, Jason Weeks is one of our staff members here at Unity on the Bay. And he wears, when I asked what title to introduce him, he was like, "You don't need to give a title." But he wears, I think that's probably most appropriate because he wears so many hats and has done so many things as our staff here multitask all of them. But Jason is a master of many talents. And so
Thank
I
you.
he's always so generous in the tea time with each one of us that he has interviewed. And so him to I wanted to showcase his wisdom So for some of you that know him, that have known him long enough, you may remember him talking in the Hour. And I'll never forget this one Hour that he was talking about patience. And I remember thinking in my mind, "Ah, I got this down. This is patience is something I pray for in my early 20s. My grandfather was very equanimous. He was very patient, and I prayed to him, and I felt I was very patient. And that week after that Hour, oh my God, the universe showed me how impatient I still was and how much more work I could do. And so I'll never forget that lesson from Jason. And I I do my best to not say like, "Oh, I've got that already." Whenever I hear something new, regardless of who might be speaking it. So,
Yeah.
Jason, I one of the things I had shared with Jason that I was listening to Alan Watts on Gaia, and one day I just couldn't listen to him because he just speaks at this like calm, steady pace, and I was just like 100 miles per hour, so I couldn't take it. But then I went back and I listened to him, and he talks. If you take the time to listen to him, he will take something very simple and going very deep with it. And so I think I was listening this morning, actually I was listening to him, and he was talking about the Japanese gardens. And I don't know if you guys have been to the Morikami Museum and Gardens, but I love. Good
Hmm.
morning, Marlena. I love the going out there, and he was talking about growing stones, just growing stones, and how the whole process of putting a stone in one place, and the whole idea. One of the things he does a lot is he makes us question like our perception, our previous perceptions or judgments of things. Like he says, we focus. He was talking about the difference between the East and the West, and how something that we usually regard as that is not alive, that they see the life in it. And when we add the scientific into it, right, we know that molecules are always moving regardless. So um all this to say, how does that approach to life, how does that perspective that Alan Watts brings to life, how has it made you, how has it changed you, how have you chosen to take that wisdom in, and how has it changed the way you perceive life and look at things and act from it?
Yeah, the thing, I'll put it this way, Carmen. The thing about Alan Watts that I really love is he studies nature. Like he looks at nature and looks at nature of like how it functions and how it's alive, all of it, really. And then he tries to apply that to how we live. And so he'll say, like be like water. And I'm sure you've heard this before. Be like water, flow like water, like he'll make all these similarities, but the big thing that he says about us is we have this belief that there's nature and then there's us. And almost like we dropped into nature, and he says that's not true. What happened is we've come through nature, so we're a part of nature. And we spend a great deal of our lives trying to, we think it's humans versus nature, right? So like a hurricane comes and it's like we're against it, or an earthquake comes and we're against it. And he says, you need to start living your life remembering that you too are part of nature. And that really impacted me because I start to live like water. I start to live, let me put it this way, I stop pushing away my natural instincts. Does that make sense? Like
Hmm.
especially in religion. So we do this in religion. Oh gosh, should I use this example?
Use it.
Okay, okay. We we have sexual desires, and in religion, In many religions, it says repress that. That's sinful. And so what happens? We start getting guilty about that, that we shouldn't have them. But if we're part of nature, this is a natural thing that occurs in our body, right? And so Alan Watts would say that's happening for a reason. Um, and we shouldn't shun it, we shouldn't push it away. And so look at your life and see what natural things are occurring that you're pushing away and the kind of stress that's causing you. Um, I'm trying to think of another example, but one's not coming to mind. But that's a good one. Sexual desires.
It's a good
Gosh,
one,
how,
and
yeah, go
it's
ahead.
part of just being with who we are in that moment, being with who we are, and trusting. He was talking about just trusting that the direction is going to flow through. He was in out in nature in the San Francisco hills, and he was talking about the hills being all wiggly. That was his word, wiggly, and he just kept using the word. um so it's stuck in my head, but he was talking about how when we try to do things, we we try to make things in straight lines, and how our streets are straight lines, and um how we move away from nature, and how we try to reverse engineer. He didn't use that word, but that's
Hmm.
the word I'm using. Reverse engineer things, and so that we think we can replace nature. So in a way, like the
Hmm.
arrogance, and like we can make it better. And so he was talking about how a flower just opens up from the center out, but if we have to build a flower,
Hmm.
we build it from the outside in. And it just makes me think about how true it is. This was in the 70s that he was talking about this. And it makes me think about how we have created cheap and how we are in that effort of being better than that competition, of being better, or like replacing nature, being better than nature. And he was talking about how sometimes with technology we cause more harm than good, and when we leave nature alone, just nature be, it it heals, right? And so when I was in college, we worked in a campaign for the Everglades, and when we allowed the Everglades to be, they regenerated themselves. So nature does have that capability, and I think that expands to us too, to our physical bodies. And I think, like you said, just that idea that we are part of nature, our bodies can regenerate themselves when we move away from that intrusion.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I love that Neil Donald Walsh says that God, the word God and life are the same. So when we talk about life, when we talk about nature, we're also talking about God. And what you're talking, I love when you said that Alan Watts talks about life, he calls it wiggly. And another word for that is life is on a wavelength, right? It's always in a cycle. We see it everywhere in nature, right? Life, death, seasons, winter, fall. It's all there. And this goes back to what I was saying about we think as humans that we came into nature instead of coming through nature. And so we're always fighting against nature, right? An example would be peaches. Peaches have a season, right? Peaches only grow a certain time of year, but what did humans do? They came in, they created greenhouses, let's just say that, so that we could grow peaches year round. Well, what if we're not meant to eat peaches year round? You know what I mean? Like here we are going against nature. Um, you know, here we are eating all this sugar year round. Maybe it was we weren't intended to eat this sugar year round. And it has consequences because what? We're going against nature. We're going against the flow of things. That's just one example. We could find, a ton. We dam up rivers. Um, it has consequences. So, how I would ask our audience today, how are you opposing nature? How are you opposing God? How are you opposing life? And what are some of those circumstances that you're going through because of that. It's not because God is bad, it's just sort of the natural law. We are part of nature. If you're opposing it, then there's going to be consequences.
Yeah, or how have
Boom.
you or how have they done it, and then how have they seen the difference when they have stopped opposing whatever has been, even with the changes, right? Oftentimes we resist changes. So have you seen yourself resisting a change that will be part of the natural flow of life, and once you like trust it and let yourself go with it, how do you see that impacting your life, changing your life and the life of the people around you, if you were able to notice that?
Yeah, exactly. Let's, gosh, should I say this or not? I don't know. I'm probably going to get some haters out there, but I'll say it anyway. Let's talk about climate change. I know it's very politically charged. I personally think that we haven't been around long enough to see the full cycle of the earth. And I think what is happening is we're going through a cycle that the earth goes through. Have we aggravated it? Probably. But we don't have full control over that. How do we know that this isn't just a wiggle, as Alan Watts says? Um, and so we're doing a lot of resistance to it. Like, oh my gosh, we have to stop this. Well, maybe we can, and maybe we just need to go with the flow of it. Um, Alan Watts says, we're going to destroy the world when we try to save it. So again, we're opposing the natural forces of life,
Mhm.
and we may be aggravating it. There,
That's
I
such
said it. Climate change.
that's an interesting point of view. It
Yeah.
reminds me of oh my god, this comedian, he passed away also. I can't think of his name right now. Oh my god, but I remember thinking, I remember him saying uh, that we are presumptuous in thinking that we can save the earth, that the earth has its own wisdom,
Hmm.
and power. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that it can regenerate itself. I think sometimes we just have to get ourselves out of the way. We got to remove the intrusions. And it's kind of like a hard, it's kind of like a little bit of a catch 22, because it's almost like part of our growth and our development. Like as we continue to grow and multiply, we need to build homes, but like where do we find that balance? Where do we sink in with the like our needs, and providing for the human population, and at the same time providing for nature, and for the animals to coexist with us, and to intertwine that, and have that balance. It's, I guess that's it.
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't have the answer to that. The what comes to mind for me is connecting with what's natural for us. Like, I'm sure, Carmen, you've had times when you do things that seem unnatural. Just being aware of those things. Like, nothing comes to mind right now, but being being in being in tune with nature, right? So look at some of the things we do as humans that are going against this natural flow. Um, Commuting. Look at the craziness of commuting. And it's almost like when COVID happened, it was like redirecting us. Like, do we really need to be driving to work every day and causing all this emissions? Like, let's see if this works. Let's work from home. Oh my God. Wow. Look, it's working.
And
They're like,
nature, the way nature recuperated, right? Like children
yeah.
in China were seeing the sky for the first time in their life. There are people living in China who had never seen the sky before COVID, which is like insane, because we're blessed to live here in Florida and have like beautiful blue skies most of the time when it's not like pouring rain. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
it's
and people are waking up to the benefits of living more naturally, spending time in nature, eating living real food. Like they're seeing, like, wow, like this whole packaging and freezing and preserving food isn't working for us, because that's not how we were meant to be in nature, right? We were hunters and gatherers. We could only eat what we had in our hands, and it had to come from the earth. There was no microwaves.
And
Did you see a Neanderthal with a microwave on his back? I don't think so.
only when there was one following him behind with an extension cord.
With a solar panel. Uh,
Um,
so that's to wrap this whole section up is that's what I love about Alan Watts. He says again, we come through nature. It's not the opposite. We haven't dropped here and then we have to fight it. He also says, like, what do trees do? Trees, he says, they produce apples. What does wheat do? It produces wheat. What does the earth do? It produces people. And so we're a product of the earth.
hmm,
And so if we can live in tune with God, life, nature, then there might be less suffering.
that's
Okay.
beautiful. That's
You're the
beautiful.
host. You're the host. Let's shall we
This is
shall
today. This is your soapbox.
I love a good
So
soapbox.
so I so yes. So I welcome your sharing. That's why we're here. And
Thank you.
I was gonna say he. Well, first I wanted to say, just to as part of closing of this segment, that access consciousness, that why we feel so at ease and so centered when we're in nature is because nature has no judgment. It has no judgment. So
Yeah.
when we walk in, and we are we are connected, we're so interconnected, and like our magnetic waves expand and connect with each other, right? We're like electrical, and everything electrical has a magnetic field. And so oftentimes we don't think about ourselves that way, especially because we don't, most of the time, most of us do not see other people's magnetic field. We do feel them, right? Like we may feel their emotions and what they're feeling, and we may see somebody walking towards us and we're like, oh, or we're like, yay. So it's just like unconsciously we pick up on that
Yeah.
energy. And so being in nature allows us to be in that place of being just like when we're with a good friend, that we can pour our heart out and share our horrors and what we have been, and they can hold us, right? Like you had a quote in Facebook that said just witnessing for each other, and so nature witnesses for us. and
Yeah.
and that's powerful, that powerful idea of that. So
I love that, Carmen. And you were talking about not judging, and what can we learn from nature, from God? Trees, as far as I know, they don't judge us. I mean, I might be wrong. um, so it's about being, connecting and returning to nature. And so an exercise that's really powerful is go outside, spend time in nature, and pick one thing in nature and sit there with it in silence and see what you can learn from it. Like sit by a tree. What can you learn from a tree? It goes with the flow. Sometimes when the wind is too hard, it breaks. It's okay as a human to break, like when things get very tough. But what do? We go against nature and we have to be strong, right? And what does that cause us to do? So we can learn a lot from nature, from God, from life. Um, I invite you, Carmen, to ask as the host if people have questions. I'm not.
this is
I'm not
Jason
controlling.
101 coaching Carmen on being hostess of the tea time and holding himself back as much as he can. So I would like, I don't see any feedbacks, not even any hate or questions about nature or perspectives or point of view of we will we promise you we won't cry in front of camera. If you hurt our feelings, we'll save it for later. And you can share your perspective. We can agree to disagree. We don't all have to have the same perspective. So your perspectives are welcome, your questions and your comments.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I would be interested to hear what, like if anybody's having any ahas, like what are you doing in your life that's opposing nature and what kind of stress is that causing you? Or, do you hate me for saying what I said about climate change? Like it's fine. It's we all have opinions, right? Um, okay. People are quiet this morning.
you
I
you
can
can
talk
have
until the cows come home.
some more coffee.
Yeah. We'll just be here in silence and make it very awkward for you all.
I just
uh,
I'll share the story of Ram Dass and Alan Watts. Ram Dass shares this story of him and Alan Watts being in a monastery. I mean, just the setting alone, both of them being in a monastery in the kitchen in the wee hours of the morning drinking. So it's 2 or 3 of the morning. He sort of implies that they're a little bit drunk. And although he doesn't say that, but that's how I imagined it. And so Alan Watts tells Ram Dass, you know what your problem is?
can you imagine that?
And
Telling Alan Watts, you know what your problem is?
And so Ramdas says when somebody in this setting at this time in the morning tells you something like that, it's like you have to listen because it's truth coming out. And so Alan Watts proceeds to tell Ramdas his problem. He says, your problem is that you are attached to emptiness. You are attached to emptiness. And so to me, I was just like, it blew my mind because that's so brilliant. Because how do you attach yourself to emptiness? It's
Yeah.
impossible. And yet it's kind of how do we attach ourselves to a concept, to an idea, to the point that it doesn't serve us? Alan Watts is very big on just being in the flow and just allowing, allowing life. And
Hmm.
so I will ask you, Jason, where have you found yourself? I'll ask our audience, where have you found yourself that you have attached yourself to something that no longer serves you? Maybe it served you for a little while, maybe it was a lifesaver, but how did it hinder you? And when did you allow yourself to release or let go, or are you still holding on to something that you can notice right now that is not serving you?
Yeah. That's a good question, Carmen. Chris, are you still watching? I hope not, because you're not going to like what I have to say. Chris is my boss and our senior minister. Um, okay, this is probably another thing that people aren't going to like me for. We can get attached to spirituality, and I think that's what Ram Dass was saying to Alan Watts. Like,
Alan Watts to Ramdas.
yeah, exactly. Thank you. I was testing you. You passed. Um, we can get attached to spirituality, and this happened to me. When I first got into spirituality and started reading all the books, like I was really attached to doing it perfectly. Like, in fact, my friends got really annoyed with me because there wasn't ever a dinner that we would go out to that I wasn't trying to correct them spiritually. One of my favorite things to say was like the Father and I are one, and it used to like really get on people's nerves. Um, and I was just like 24/7 spiritual. Like like do there was a lot of doing if I was to put it anyway.
Devoted, very devoted.
Yeah, yeah, but here's the thing that I learned about a spiritual journey is it's circular. And so I had to go through all of that and almost circle back to where I began, but I where I landed once I began was exactly where I started, except I had this knowing that life was perfect just the way it was. And I no longer had to do spirituality. I was spirituality.
Hmm.
Um, and it was a
Chris says that
letting
he
go.
agrees, by the way, you're not fired yet anyway.
So I didn't, it wasn't like I was meditating more than I was before. It wasn't like I was praying. It's almost like, gosh, how do you describe it? It's almost like a change in perspective. So you realize that you weren't wrong in the way you were living before. It was actually perfect, but sort of like your judgments about it were wrong. Um,
Hmm.
and and so I stopped holding on to spirituality as this thing I needed to do. Another way of putting it, I was perfect just the way I was. It was my judgments about myself that were imperfect. Um, that's probably really confusing to people.
No,
But
that's
I
really
think,
powerful.
yeah.
There,
Um,
there, there
but
is a quote.
you have to go through that.
Yeah, there is a
So
quote
go ahead.
about that that says that we are back to the beginning. We go back to the beginning, and now we're knowing it almost like for the
Yeah.
first time again. So it's just seeing it with fresh new eyes, and you were seeing yourself with fresh new eyes.
Yeah, exactly. There's a Chinese story. It's pretty long, but I'll sum it up. There was a blacksmith in a village that was very good at what he did, and every so often the king would ride by in his carriage, and the blacksmith would think to himself, "Gosh, I wish I was the king." And one day he was reincarnated as the king, and once he was the king, every day when he would ride through the village, he would look up at the birds and say, "Gosh, I wish I was the birds." And one day he was reincarnated as the birds, and then when he was the bird, he was like, "Wow, I wish I was the sun." He was reincarnated as the sun, and then when he was the sun, he looked down on the blacksmith and he was like, "I really wish I was the blacksmith."
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's kind of the same thing. Like life is circular, and when we get back to the beginning, we realize there was nothing ever wrong with us to begin with. Um, I really summed that up there. It's a very long story, but you get the gist. What about
Yeah,
you? Is have you was there a particular thing in life that you were attached to, and did you let go of it?
I think. Well, just going back to the story just first for a minute, it just makes me think of when I was 20 years old and I thought I was overweight and I wasn't pretty, and
Mm,
then when I was of just enjoying the right here and the right now, and just flowing with life. And Ram
okay.
Dass also talks about this, about just finding this equanimity and this joy and this peace in the midst of everything that's going on. He talks about how, and every time I talk about Ram Dass, I think of Reverend Juan, because he was the one that introduced me really
Yeah.
into my life. And it he talks about it's not about not taking action with what's going on. It's about finding the balance of seeing what's going on, taking the action that we're being called to from our lives, and yet at the same time know that everything is happening in perfect order and be in perfect peace and joy and equanimity, which is a huge task. But I think that's something that we are called to do in our daily lives. I think definitely when we witness to each other, when we are as a prayer chaplain, when I pray with someone, just
Hmm.
holding the prayer, the moment, like acknowledging what they're going through, and at the same time, remembering their greatness and their power and their light. And so it's finding, seeking that on a daily basis. And in my experience, I find it's easier to do it for somebody else, to be that witness for somebody else. And sometimes it's so challenging for us. So I think that's why
Mm,
to do it for myself. And so I think that's why it's important. That's where our friends and fellow prayer chaplains and brothers and sisters on the path in our lives become so important, because when we can witness for each other when each one of us is going through those challenges, um, they remind us of our truth and our power, and lend us theirs until we remember ours sometimes. So,
yeah. Yeah, life is very, I think, complex beyond what we can even comprehend, and so I don't pretend to have it all figured out, like I think God has that, and we're just here to play our individual parts and follow that inner guidance that says this is what's next. This is what's next. Because gosh, imagine the burden that would be to know the full picture of things. Like that wouldn't be very kind of God to be like, here's life, deal with it. You know what I mean? Like here's the scope of life. And let us have to deal with that in our minds. And so it would just be unkind. So we
And
have
yeah, and at the same time, I find that to be a judgment of being unkind. It's kind of is I would say at the same time remembering that we are part of the oneness at all times, whether we remember it or not, and
Mhm.
everything that we need to know is given to us. And so any messages that we may need, any information, any support, it's sometimes it takes removing the veil from our eyes. That's a big one because in my studies with Kabbalah, they talk about klipots and just removing the veils,
Mhm.
and so that kind of like
Yeah.
stuck with me. But this idea of sometimes we pray for guidance to ourselves, to our higher self, to God, whichever way you see it, to the universe. And sometimes we have in our minds the way those answers are supposed to come. And I think sometimes that's why we feel, or I'll speak for myself. Sometimes that's how what it has happened to me, and it may happen still. I'll be humble and honest. It's just
Thank
this
you.
idea of of thinking like, oh, help is going to come to me this way, love is going to come to me this way, and then when we drop um those attachments of how the prayer is supposed to be answered, then all of a sudden we see help and love and money and abundance coming to us from different from all directions, right? Up, down, above, right, left,
Mhm.
back, front, everywhere, and kindness and that joy. So I think even I think even that just can be an attachment, attaching ourselves to the idea of how our prayers are going to be
Yeah.
answered. Or
Yeah. Life, again, I think is complex. And like Alan, like not being vigilant about not being attached to things is also an attachment, right? So it's almost
it can
impossible not
be.
to be, yeah, it's almost impossible not to be attached to things. Um, it's like when we talk about nothing, nothing is something, right?
Yeah,
Because otherwise it wouldn't have a name. Um, it's like when we try to be virtuous, we're not virtuous because you can't try to be virtuous. It's like life is just complex and just I don't know where I'm going with that, but
but I think we're being very Alan Wattsy, and
yeah.
and I think that's it goes to his whole point of just allowing life, because we are humans, so just our human nature, our human instincts, sex, food, like anything. Like I remember one of my spiritual dads, he used to say like a food addiction is one of the hardest addictions to overcome, um because you cannot just stop eating. Well, I mean, some people can, right? Like there are what are they called, breatharians, that they just breathe, they don't eat.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
haven't known any personally. But it's just this idea that we can almost make anything an addiction, and we can almost make anything an attachment. And Reverend Chris actually talks about that, right? Like about addictions and how we can make anything an addiction. And so it and then at the same time, it's like, how do we find the equanimity in the midst of that? How do we find the balance, and how do we allow ourselves to be just present, like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and this is what I did, and this is where I'm attached, and this is when I'm not willing to change. Like at work, change is constant. There is so much change, and I can see how my resistance and the resistance of the people that I work with every time a change is thrown at us. And it's just I learned, not in my current, I used to work for the phone company, and they used to, every so often, they used to move us around. They used to move the whole team around. You had to change desks, you had to change areas. And I was like, OMG, how disruptive. And then I
Hmm.
realized there was wisdom in that, because we become stagnant. If we become stagnant, and then you're not as good of a salesperson, because you are comfortable and just kind of, you just hit this zone. And so by them moving us around, it was very subconscious, but it just kept us growing and evolving. And life does that. Oftentimes it doesn't look very kind, but there's just whole idea of how we get shaken up, we get sick, a loved one dies, COVID happens, all these things get, we make plans and then we have to like reschedule them, right? Like one of my our friends had a whole wedding plan that had to like postpone it for the next year, and they were not the only ones. That happened to a lot of people. So life has this kindness of helping us grow through all these huge, uncomfortable, challenging challenges. So how, I don't know, how do you feel yourself? How with the people? What are the people saying? What do the people have to? And Marlena, by the way, she said she loved the idea of finding a single part of nature and connecting with it. She said she's
Yeah.
gonna try it out. And Sherry is hearting us. Thank you, Sherry. So, so
Yeah, change is an interesting subject. It, God, people are really not going to like me. Um,
that's such a
you know,
judgment of yourself
yeah,
and them and them.
yes,
So I
and of
invite
them.
you to release, maybe or not, right or wrong, good and bad.
There's, we talk about people being resistant to change, and we almost have a judgment on that, like it's bad to resist change. But what if it was okay to resist change? Like, we have this habit of spiritual people that we have to always be positive, and that causes a lot of strife in our life. But what happens if something changed and we were okay with having a hissy fit with it? Like, oh my God, I hate this. Like, you changed my cubicle and you have your pity party. Like, what if the resistance to change is what's perpetuating your pity party? Instead of
Wow.
just going fully and deeply into it, having your pity party, and then all of a sudden it's over. Like, we see this happen in nature. Again, back to nature. There's animals out there that do not want to be put into cages, but we pull them out of the natural habitat, put them in a cage, and they freak out, right? Again, it's like we as humans create this construct of how we should live, and we force ourselves to live this way, and we get stressed out about it. One of my favorite movies is this Civil War love story called Cold Mountain. And one of my favorite scenes in it is they're in the middle of the Civil War, and there's these two women working on the farm, and they're shoveling hay, and the one throws down her fork and she says, "Gosh darn it!" She doesn't say that. I'm just not saying the other word. "Gosh darn it! We created this storm, and we stand out in the rain and say, 'Gosh darn it, it's raining.'" And that's what I'm getting at about, we create these constructs that are unnatural, and then we get upset when we have to live by them.
Hmm.
So I would challenge the belief that we have to be okay with change. Is that natural? Um,
That
okay,
would be an
unity on the
attachment too.
yeah,
That's an attachment too. That's an attachment I
but
had
what
until a
happened?
few moments ago. Now I'm
Yeah,
questioning it.
but that's the thing. We accept these things as truth, and we live by them, and we're like, why am I stressed? Like this doesn't make sense. Um, that's interesting. Unity on the Bay just posted. This sucks, and it's the way it must be. Okay, I don't know who that was because usually I post this video today. Um, am I happy about it? No. But you see what happens, Carmen? We can start to begin laughing about life when there's no resistance to it. Um, but yeah, but I'll also say this, some of the rules that we have about life might need to be put into place for us to live as a society. Like there might be things that just don't work from a society's perspective. And that's why they're in place. Like in nature, animals kill each other. That doesn't work in society. That doesn't create a safe place for us. And so again, I go back to life is complicated.
That
Uh,
and if I may, that's perfect because that brings us back to Alan Watts because he was talking in one of his videos. He's talking about how uh, he doesn't consider Buddhism a religion. He considers Buddhism a way of liberation. I'm looking at my notes, a way of liberation, and because he says religion, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam, has a it's a set of rules, and he says the root of religion, like the original name, is to bind together. But he says that Buddhism and religion complement each other. And he talks about that. He says when religion didn't exist, we were hunting and gathering, but the moment we came together as a society, he doesn't call it that, but as an agrarian society, uh, that we were steady in one place, then we needed this set of rules to be able to coexist. And
yeah,
so it's beautiful that you just spoke Alan Watts um, without quoting him directly, because that's exactly what he
yeah,
said. So it goes back to just going back to balance and finding that balance of um, resisting the change and going with the flow and being in allowance and just allowing everything to be, even the resistance of the change.
yeah, exactly. Um, Gosh, there's so much I could say. And you know what, Alan Watts does this a lot. He contradicts himself. Um, and I think a lot of life is contradictory, and that's what makes it so complex. Because in this situation, this works. But if you take that same thing and put it in this situation of life, it doesn't work. Um, and we as humans, we love to like try to understand and interpret and break down and control, and that's part of letting go. And like that's why I'm okay with life being complex. Like I used to want to know everything about life, and there's just things that I'll never understand about it. Um, and that's okay. And I will contradict myself sometimes.
Ram
um, yeah,
Ramdas talks about that. He was talking about the mystery, just being in the mystery, and finding that balance of the suckiness of life. And these are my words, my
hmm
translation, and I apologize for those Ramdas lovers. Um, my my suckiness of the suckiness of the world and the beauty of the world, and just be in the presence of it all and be in awe of it all, and just allowing the mystery to be, which is something I'm striving for, but not necessarily somewhere I'm at all the time.
hmm
Or but just
I know you're the host, but I did have a quote that I think is so appropriate for this moment from Alan Watts, so I would love to read it.
Yes, please.
Okay, one
This is a
sec.
Jason showcase on Alan Watts and many more things.
Alan Watts says this: the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. And so we're just here to experience life, and everything that comes with it, the ups, the downs, the wiggles, right? Like you said, Carmen, we try to flatten the wiggles. But imagine if you were on a roller coaster and it was a straight line.
Ah,
No, nobody would ride that, right? We're in it for the wiggles, right? We're in it for those highs and those lows and those drops. Alan Watts also says, life, we came into this life, it's a dream for us really, and we forgot that it's a dream because why? We wanted it to be the wildest ride of our lives.
mm,
And here we are fighting these ups and downs, these sideways, when in reality that's what life is. It's the excitement of all that. Um, so just to be alive, just to be alive. And there was somewhere I was going with that. There was a story I was going to share. Now I forgot it. Um, yeah,
I'll share
imagine what
this
that.
to see. Will you until you remember? Kathy Tyson says, "Thank you so much. I can relate. Relate. Nice to see we're not alone, and we all struggle with something, no matter how perfect we look from the outside. I get it now. Namaste. Namaste.
Thank you, Catherine. I just lost it again. It came to me and I lost it. And it was so profound.
Alan
Ah.
Watts on a sense of humor.
Oh,
He,
no, I got it. I got it. I got it. I got it. Okay, so I don't know if some of you believe in spirits or ghosts or whatever, but it's believed that when you drink or when you do drugs, your aura that surrounds you, your body magnetic field, it gets holes in it. And when you get these holes, there's spirits hanging around that try to penetrate through that to embody you. And they say the reason they do that is because life and the human experience is so amazing that these spirits want to have that experience.
hmm,
Again, I don't know if this is real or not, but what does that say? This life and this experience is a gift, and it might be the greatest gift in the universe. And some of us walk around so bummed out about it. So, what would life be like if we could be like, oh my God, I got fired. How exciting. Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's a stretch to get there, like, I know it's funny, right? This is your soul laughing, Carmen, I believe, because souls laugh when it hears truth. It's like, here we are opposing the ups and downs of life, but really the purpose of life is to live it all.
I say we um we come into this world like we're in heaven or whatever we come from, right? Like we're in the oneness. We're in the oneness. We
Hmm.
haven't split up into it yet, and we're like, oh my god, I am so excited. This looks so good. And so we're like, okay, where's the contract? I'm gonna sign the contract. I'm buying this life. I'm in. I'm all
Hmm.
bought in. And I think, and I always say, in that excitement, like I forgot to read the small print of, your vibration will lower into a physical body. You will experience struggle, change, trauma. It's kind of like when you're buying the car and they're like, oh, this car is only 150, and then like in the small print, you will have to pay a $3,500 down payment. Blah blah blah. So I think we're like the same way. We come into life, we're like, oh my God, yes. And then we forget, right? And so I've heard that
Yeah,
story about getting the holes into the aura and stuff like that.
yeah.
Um,
Yes, and listen, I'm no master of this. There's parts of life that I'm like, I hate it. Like I hate doing my taxes. Um, and it's just part of the ride. Anybody out there have questions, comments, concerns? Thumbs up, amen, thumbs down. Like, are you alive out there? Oh well, I just want to say, Carmen, I'm not that I'm wrapping this up because this is your job, but thank you for coming up with this idea. I adore Alan Watts. He inspires me. He tortures me. Some of the stuff he says I don't agree with, but I think he was a brilliant man of his time. Like I said in the beginning, I think he was the greatest philosopher of the modern age. Um, so thank you for catching this idea and bringing it to life.
I definitely appreciative. I'm very appreciative of you always, and I love you, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to go deeper into Alan Watts and deeper into one of the sources or one of the guides in your wisdom. And he definitely, I do see him as a master and as a teacher. And I was talking to you about how the other day he was just talking and he was presenting the tea ceremony. So here he is in the 70s introducing the tea ceremony as the Japanese tea ceremony as a matter of fact, just as something normal and common, while he's just talking and sharing his wisdom and depth and just kind of he scrutinizes life. And so I think that's something wise to do, is to continue to question life. And I see how time has flown, and we have been together almost an hour, and we could talk a couple more hours about this forever. And so, what are your final words of wisdom about Mr. Watts?
um, if you're not familiar with him, go check him out on YouTube. There's so much material. We're lucky that in the time he was alive, we could capture his voice. I think that's one of the other powerful things about him is the way he orates. Is that the word? Orates? I don't know. The way
Orated.
he speaks. Yes. He has a certain way of talking because he realizes the importance of negative space as well. So he tends to talk with gaps in between what he's saying, and he speaks that way for a reason. You may notice that in the way Eckhart Tolle talks. But go listen to him, question what he has to say. Um, I'd be interested, to see what people have to say about him. Um, yeah, like I said, he has some real gems of wisdom. He has a bunch of, by the way, he also has a bunch of books. Um, you know, read him, study him. He talks a lot about the human condition and why we are the way we are.
And you don't have to agree with everything he says, and we'll tell you right off the bat he was not perfect,
Mm-hmm.
and that's just part of life, right? Part of who we are too. So, and at the same
Yeah,
time, like, one thing does not, like, the wisdom is still there, one thing does not have to negate the other unless we choose to. But so we can appreciate both. So
correct.
it
And if I get a chance, I'm going to find one of my favorite videos of his and I'll post it in the comments section here. And it talks about why we came into incarnation and sort of why it's okay to ride this roller coaster and why we designed it this way. One of my faves. So go ahead,
I've
Carmen.
also,
Sorry to interrupt.
no, it's okay. I have also been listening to him in Gaia, their a bunch of his videos there in Gaia. So if you subscribe to Gaia, then you can definitely check him out there. And
And I would love to do this again with you. I think maybe you can pick another philosopher. And listen, I have the gift of gab. Like I went to Ireland and literally kissed the Blarney Stone, so I can talk all day about anything. Um, so let's do this again. I love it. I love not being the host, actually. I don't feel pressure. Um, um, any last comments from our audience? I see a lot of stuff saying they love this dialogue. Thanks, Chris. Um, Jonathan is staying on brand. He says, yes. Um, I'm just so glad everybody checked in today. Oh, there's our Associate Minister, Juan. You're welcome, Juan. Um, any parting comments, Carmen?
I just love being here with you, love sharing with our audience. Look forward to reading the comments in the future of people that will be watching this in the days to come. And thank you for agreeing to do this. And thank you for sharing your brilliance and your wisdom and your love and your joy with us and your path.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Thank you for hosting me.
You're welcome.
Bye,
It was about
everyone.
time.